keep it real with ya.
Hey everybody, it's me Minu back with another video. I guess it's bright enough outside. I don't need a thingy. But I don't know if I've worn this before. I got it from Shein. It's kind of fitted though. I don't like wearing it too much cuz it's kind of tight on me. But yeah, check out the hoodie. Anyway, let's see if I can get this video done before I have therapy today. So, first things first, I want to say I am super happy and excited about all of you who are considering therapy, who are going to therapy, who are encouraged by my videos to get therapy. That makes me really, really happy. And you know, like I've said in some other videos, like, you know, I've been taught my whole life that I'm basically a horrible person who hates people and abuses other people. So it makes me really, really happy that I can have a positive impact on people, even if it's just, you know, inspiring them to go to therapy. It's a huge step to go to therapy. Just to go in the first place is a huge step. So it makes me really, really happy that you guys are doing that you are telling me about it, that you are sharing your experiences with it. And in honor of that, I wanted to talk about basically choosing a therapist that's right for you, basically. So I've talked about this in my video on like bipolar disorder and CPTSD. So I won't repeat myself a lot. If you guys want, you know, some more in-depth information, you can go and watch those videos. Those are in the ABCs of Minu playlist. But anyway, so I am somebody who kind of, because of my past experiences, I understand that you should be very picky when choosing a therapist, because it can be really like, it can be like a very like defining moment for you. So like I know people who've given up on therapy from one bad therapist. You know, I had a friend, so the friend that's not my friend anymore, because they chose to side with their pedophile boyfriend over me. Well, me and everybody else, because everybody else was like, that's a problem. But they basically gave up on therapy, even though they were showing some real psychotic symptoms, because of the fact that their mom had brought them to therapy. And I don't know how many of you people have had this experience, but usually what happens when a parent brings their child to therapy is because the parent doesn't actually want to help their child or actually like fix whatever's wrong. It's because the parent thinks that therapy will make their child more obedient to them. So, and I see some TikToks on this about from therapists as well, where they have issues where the parent will bring their child to therapy and say, I don't know what's wrong with them. I don't know what's wrong with them. Fix them, fix them, fix them. And then the therapist will be like, oh, looks like we got an issue with depression or anxiety. Like we have to deal with this, right? And the parent will be like, I don't give a fuck about none of that. Make them do what I say when I tell them to. You know what I mean? And I had a similar experience when I was in basically this mental health facility that I chose to go to, that I went there and I was like, don't let me go back home with this woman. And the facility, because it usually had a lot of teenagers, their whole thing was, you need to do what your parents tell you to when they tell you to. So it was less of, we care about your mental health, and more of, you need to act right. This is how we get you to, you know, get in line, whatever, you're a delinquent and some shit, which was very triggering and upsetting for me. And then they also like, they believe everything the parent says, which is, a good therapist would not believe everything the parent says. A good therapist would be like, okay, parent, I hear what you're saying. Now let me go talk to Jessica and talk to her alone and see what she's really feeling and what her interpretation of the situation is. A bad therapist would be like, okay, Jessica, so your mom told me that you got an attitude problem. We're not going to have that here. You're going to get that attitude together so you can go home and be good for your mom. That's a bad therapist. And some of you have had those people. And so like, that's first and foremost. A lot of people have that experience and they're like, oh, I'll never go to a therapist again because they're just going to turn against me or whatever. Another issue when you run into a bad therapist is just, they're just not a good fit for you. So sometimes they might be a good therapist, but they're the wrong therapist for you. So in my experience, with mental health professionals, and seeing mental health professionals since I was even at a young age, I've always preferred to have white or non-black, therapists or psychiatrists or whatever. And it's not even a racism thing. It's just like, because I know that some people prefer someone of their own culture and race because they can understand you, which is totally fine. But in my experience with the type of issues that I was having, a lot of my issues stemmed from Black culture and Black like parenting culture. So if I was to see a Black therapist, particularly a Black woman therapist, they would look at my issues and say, well, that's normal. Like, what are you talking about? Like, Black parents were authoritarian. You have to listen to your parents. Like, what are you talking about? My parents were authoritarian and I turned out just fine. I'm a therapist. What's the problem? So I would have a lot of those experiences, especially if I was like expressing that I had issues with my mom and the therapist was a Black mother. They would be even more biased, you know what I mean? And be like, well, your mother's just trying to help, you know what I mean? And so I found it more comforting for me to see a white therapist who, well, I never saw a white therapist who tried to demonize my culture. Like, the therapists that I've chosen or that I've ended up with have been very progressive, very much so. I am not going to speak about Black culture. We are going to talk about what happened to you. And so that is something you could potentially run into. But the therapist that I ended up with tended to be more liberal and progressive, and they knew their place, I would say. So they never commented on Black culture. They commented on me and what happened to me and why the things that happened to me was an issue. So that's one thing, is you want to make sure that your therapist is a good culture fit. So like I said, some people might find that having a Black therapist who understands their struggles, maybe you're dealing with issues of racism. Maybe you're the only Black person in the office at work. Maybe you're the only Black person at school. Like I went to a mostly white school. I was the only Black person in class a lot of times. If that is something that bothers you, it will help you to have a Black therapist who is culturally competent and understands those issues. I didn't have much of an issue with that. I grew up with all Black people, so I did not have as much of an issue dealing with white people as my peers who dealt with them from a younger age. Another thing that you want to look out for when you're choosing a therapist is like religion. So when I was looking for therapists, because when I tried to like find my own therapist in high school, it was very, very difficult. But once I was in college, the woman that I was speaking to in college, the therapist there, was like, you have to make a decision about who you want to see. Like, don't just go to someone because they're a therapist. Look at like what their history is. And so I would look at some therapists online and I would see that their specialties included things like, they would say things like, Christian mother, with family values and stuff like that. And I'd be like, that ain't the bitch for me. She's not the one for me. No, sir. I don't want to talk to the Christian mother of family values. I don't give a fuck if you white. I don't want to talk to you about that. Because they already are going to be coming in with a lot of expectations and biases that I don't want to deal with. Now, if you're a Christian white woman, you may not have any problem seeing a Christian white woman as a therapist, but that's just not for me. So I didn't want to see anybody who specialized in any type of religious counseling, because I'm an atheist and I don't want that to be a part of my therapy. Religion ain't got shit to do with what I'm going through right now, ma'am. No, thank you. But if you are someone who is Muslim or Jewish, it may help you to have somebody who is also Muslim or Jewish because they understand what you're going through. So again, I know some people sometimes take things I say personally. What I'm saying is what works for me, and you got to find what works for you. I'm not saying that everyone should do what I'm doing. I'm just saying this is what worked for me. So religion is something you want to look at. Race is something you want to look at. That person's age is something you want to look at. Do you want a therapist who's going to be an old white man or even an old white woman? Or do you want a therapist in their 30s? I have found, outside of one person, that it makes more sense for me to see a therapist who's in their 30s, late 20s, 30s. Once they get above 40, it's a little dicey for me, just at my age now. If I'm seeing the same therapist for the next 5 years and they turn 40, that's fine. But I've seen that with the issues that I have with family, with mother, with, the way that I was raised as a child, being maladaptive, it helps me to have a therapist who is younger, who has gone through all of the most recent trainings, so that they have kind of a more progressive view of things. If you are someone who's in your 30s or 40s and you want to see someone who's in their 50s, that's fine, but understanding that it is highly likely that someone who is older is going to have some older viewpoints. And that's just something it's either your preference or it's not. And it's not my preference, because something that I noticed throughout college, throughout my early 20s, goddamn, was that whenever I brought up issues that I was having with my mother, the age of the person and the race of the person that I was talking to played a huge factor in how they responded. A lot of times, if they were older than me, they would say things like, "You don't mean that. I'm sure she's trying her best. You're being too hard on her. I think you guys should just go to therapy together. I think you guys should just have a talk." I would get a lot of that. Especially if the person was someone who wanted to be a mother or was a mother. They'd be like, "Well, your mom's doing the best she can. No one's perfect." They make all these excuses for her. And that kind of told me, like, okay, so when I see a therapist, they can't be in this type of demographic because I'm going to get the same shit. And for those of you who might say, have you tried taking your mom to therapy? Yes, I have. And they told me never to bring her ass back. Yeah. So, I'm not one of them people who can just take their parents to therapy. I know some people can, and it works. And people in my family would always say, you guys need to go to therapy. You guys can go to therapy. I took her to therapy, y'all. She may not talk about the fact that I took her to therapy because she wants to make it seem like I didn't do shit. I took her to therapy, and she did the whole narcissist rigmarole, and my therapist was like, "Don't bring her back here." And then later on, my next therapist was like, "I don't need to see your mother. I know enough about her. Her coming in here ain't gonna work. It's not gonna work because people like her are just gonna lie the whole time, and therapists don't have time for people who lie, because what we doing here if you just gonna lie?" So I did try that, but I knew that wouldn't be something that worked for me, especially if I took her to a therapist who was the same demographic as her. Anytime I disagree with my mother around someone who was the same age and race as her, they would immediately just be like, you kids today with your attitude, da-da-da-da-da. So I have no patience for any of that nonsense. But I noticed that, so I was like, they just cannot be a Black Christian older woman. It just can't happen. And I thought for a minute that maybe I didn't want to see women at all, that maybe I wanted to see like male therapists. Nah, men is just, especially if they're older, they just got attitudes that I don't have time to deal with. Like, and I will say, like, if you want to think about race, if you're seeing an old white man as a young Black woman, they're going to come at you a certain type of way, and you ain't going to want it. So I didn't even think that was good. That was, after leaving the mental facility, I was assigned to a psychiatrist who was an older Black woman, and she didn't give two fucks about what was going on with me. She weighed me, and she assigned me to drugs, and she threw me out of there. She had an attitude. Her assistant had an attitude. Didn't give two fucks. I hated her. I actually know someone who still goes to her because I guess their parents make them go to her, and they're like, she's awful. So I was like, okay, never gonna see a Black woman. You know, I kind of had that idea. I was like, I'm never gonna see another older Black woman. And literally when I got to college, the first day I had a mental breakdown. And the person who saw me, who was willing to skip her lunch break to see me, was an older Black woman. And she was amazing. She turned out to be someone who had been from the exact same background as me, but she saw things in a different way, and she saw things were toxic. So she could understand, like, hey, what your family did, they may think is right, or they may think is right from a cultural perspective, but they're wrong. They're wrong. What they did is toxic, is maladaptive. This is dysfunctional. You know, none of this is good for you. And I liked her so much that I was like, my mom might actually listen to you, because my mom is probably around the same age as you. You from the same background as her. You know, maybe you should talk to my mom. And she was like, don't bring her ass up in here. And I was like, okay. But she was like, people like your mom don't do well in therapy. They're just not going to do well in therapy, because they're going to go in there and they're going to spout off a bunch of lies and try to present themselves in this way. And the therapist is going to see through it. And the therapist is going to want to deal with it, you know. And she's like, look, I'm your therapist. I'm not your mom's therapist. I don't have several years to break through her bullshit. I got to help you. And so, and she was like, even there was a situation where she was at an event that was for me, and my mom was also there, and she completely ignored both of us. She was like, "You're not even gonna think about trying to introduce me to your mom. It's not happening, ma'am. Don't even think about it." Unfortunately, I couldn't continue seeing her because she left her job, and so she ended up passing me off to this white therapist, white woman therapist, who she was okay, but she was definitely very soft. So something that I noticed the difference in white therapists versus therapists of color is that white therapists tend to be more gentle. You know, they really like handle you with kid gloves because they're just being very careful. They never know what they might trigger by being, you know, very blunt or aggressive or anything like that, which is totally fine. I understand that's how the training works. I prefer someone who's more opinionated. And so she was fine, but she wasn't, you know, as opinionated as the black woman that I had. And so while I was also in college, I ended up getting this psychiatrist because I was like, I got to get a new psychiatrist. Like, this lady that I got, this older black lady, she's awful. And my therapist, the black therapist that I had at the time, was like, yeah, I tried to call them and they just had like the biggest attitude. And I was like, yeah, they got attitude. They don't want to do anything. And again, I'm giving you all of this story because I want you to understand that I'm not like trying to say like, oh, black therapists or black mental health professionals are bad. Some of them are. But I also want to highlight the ones in my life who have been great. So that black woman therapist that I saw in college was amazing. I loved her. And she pointed shit out. She called shit out when she saw it. And she was like, we got to find you a new psychiatrist because this lady is doing you a disservice. She's like giving you this basic ass diagnosis that means nothing. And she's just giving you drugs that don't even work. And so I ended up finding a black man psychiatrist. And I was like, this ain't gonna work. I was like, an older black man? Are you serious right now? And she was like, give it a shot. And sure enough, this was a guy he primarily dealt with people who were dealing with like things like schizophrenia and stuff. So he dealt with a lot of like psychotic mental illnesses, which bipolar disorder is technically one of them. We do get some psychotic symptoms from time to time. And he was the one who actually diagnosed me with bipolar disorder based on the history and the experiences that I told him I was having, which was good. It's good to have an official diagnosis. The other lady was doing whatever. And then we actually talked about what medications were good for me, what was working, what wasn't. And he was very much adamant about, listen, I'm not going to put you on a lot of drugs. We're going to take this slow. We're going to figure out what works for you. He was a very soft-spoken man. Like, he was the most soft-spoken man I'd ever met in my life. And I guess that's because he's dealt with people with like psychotic symptoms and trauma. But it's very soft-spoken, kind man, very disarming. Nothing about him made me feel uncomfortable. So I said, you know what? I think I can continue seeing this guy. And so like, I never thought that I would see a black man psychiatrist, you know, like I just was like, nah, that's not going to work either. But it did. He just happened to be, you know, he happened to be good for me, despite my biases that I had in my brain based off past experiences. He happened to be good for me, and he was very communicative. And even if his assistant wasn't good at like communicating with me, or I couldn't reach her, he gave me his email so that I can reach him, so I was never out of meds. But I started seeing him in college and getting on the right medication and connecting with people at my college who were going to advocate for me, considering my mental health. And like, just kind of like, I had therapy every single week, even during the breaks when everyone was gone. My therapists were there. I saw them every single week. And it was very, very good for me to, you know, manage my issues. And then fast forward now, I still see that black man psychiatrist. Now, I will say, if I knew his whole history, he's not the guy that I would have chosen because of the fact that he is a very family oriented black man. Like, those are his morals, those are his core values. He believes in family. And so my issues are with my family. So you would think that we would butt heads, but even in situations where we've disagreed or where my therapists have disagreed with him, instead of him being like, oh, they're wrong, this is what you need to do, he was always very kind, very gentle about things. So he always gently would push for me to, you know, try to have good relationships with my family members, because, you know, some people I cared a lot about. I wanted to see them do well. I wanted to help them do well. And then there were situations where I think in his core, he felt that the biggest thing that can help someone's mental health is having their family and being around their family. And so that was his core. And so I did get that from him. And I did get, like, he would say things like, don't spend the holidays alone. You want to spend the holidays around family. Spending the holidays alone could be detrimental to your mental health. He would be like, people with mental illnesses being alone on the holidays is not that good for them, basically. And so this year was the first year that I was like alone the entire holidays. That was my plan. I wasn't contacted by anyone saying, oh, please come to Christmas, oh, please come to New Year's, or please come to Thanksgiving. I didn't do that. I spent the whole holiday season by myself, and it was great. And even my physical therapist, as she was like, all up in there, she was like, I think that was really good for your pelvic floor because you didn't feel obligated or stressed about trying to force yourself into a situation where you didn't need to be. And I see him every 3 months. So I just got a call with him, and he did not know that I was no contact with my family, because last time we spoke was in October. So his first thing was like, hey, how's your family? And he always asks that. And sometimes it'd be a little irritating because I'd be like, why are you asking about why are you asking about my family? Don't worry about them. Worry about me. But I get that he tries to get like a holistic view of everything going on. So he's like, how are you? How's your cats? How's your job? How's your family? That's kind of like the way he does things, which is fine. And so when he asked me how my family was, I was like, I don't fucking know. I ain't see them niggas. And he was like, what? And I was like, nope, I am no contact with all of them. Even the step people, even the in-laws, I'm in no contact with all of them. And I could tell he was disappointed. And I was like, I know that I had forgotten until we were talking that this was a very important thing for him. So I was like, am I going to have to find a new psychiatrist? Like, what's he going to say? What's his response going to be? And he basically was like, well, me, I'm a family man. I do believe that family is very important. But over the past few years, I've seen you try everything you possibly could to make things work with them and to help them, and trying to get them to go to therapy and actually work through their issues and communicate what's going on. And I know that you've done everything you could do. So I am okay with you deciding that what's best for you is to no longer speak with them, because he felt like I had done everything. He'd be like, now, if you hadn't tried at all and you just cut them off completely, I would be saying something different. I'd be encouraging you to try, but I know you have tried. So if this is what it takes for you to heal and to get better, and those are the people who are actually causing you the stress and the pain, I'm completely fine with you saying no, and not speaking with them. And I was very surprised that he had that response, because he had been these past few years. He's always been very much about, don't spend the holidays alone. Try to make it work with your family. Not in a very like a judgmental way either. He had this way of like doing these gentle nudges, but it didn't feel like he was like, you need to have your family in your life. That's what you need. You got to make it work. It's your responsibility to make it work. He wasn't like that. Whereas other people would say things like that, like, it's your responsibility to make things work with your family, which why the fuck it's got to be mine. I was very surprised that he had that response. And so I was like, I knew that I made the right choice in choosing him as my psychiatrist all those years ago, because of the fact that even though he has his opinions and his views and his biases, he's also open to the fact that what works for him or what works for other people doesn't work for everybody. And so even though he would be like, I know for some people it helps them to connect with their family when they're going through struggles with their mental illness, for other people it don't. Or I know for some people this thing works, but for some people it doesn't. And that's okay. And it's really good to have somebody like that in your mental health team, basically. And he's also very, very happy about me going through the trauma therapy and making progress. And he was super excited about that. Another thing that I just thought about, get you a mental health professional, a therapist, psychiatrist, whatever, who is excited about you winning. You know what I mean? Like, if you tell somebody like a good thing that happened to you and they're like, oh, that's fine, they a fucking hater. Don't talk to them. Like, when I got my first car, like by myself with my shitty credit, And I told my psychiatrist, he was like, oh my God, where is that? Is it out? Can we see it through the window? Where is that? Oh my God, look at you, Minu, you got the car. Like, he was super excited for me. He was like, this is a huge thing for you. When I got a new job, he was excited. When I got another new job, he was excited. You know what I mean? Like, he's happy about me having wins. And that is very validating, you know, especially when you're somebody who you've grown up around people who, when you win, they find a way to make it sound bad. You know what I mean? Like, when you get the job, they tell you about how you're going to be fired soon, you know, and those people are awful. We know who those people are. We know. Don't talk to them no more. They're not good for you. And so, like, he has been very good, and he trusts me too. He trusts me with my medication management. He knows that I'm not an addict. He knows that I'm not, you know, trying to sell pills or whatever. You know, he's like, listen, whatever you need on your journey to healing, I got you. And if you can't reach me for some reason, don't hesitate to send me an email. If I got to call you after I get off work from my other job, that's just what I'm going to have to do to make sure you're taken care of. Like, we're not going to have you out here, you know, without things that you need. You need me to write a letter to your job, you know, for some type of accommodation. I got you. That's the type of person that you want. If you are seeing a mental health professional and they seem not that enthusiastic to see you, I would look for someone else. I would. I know sometimes we feel an obligation. Well, people like me. People like me who have been raised to kind of be people pleasers, we feel an obligation to our therapist to like continue seeing them. But you gotta understand, like, you paying them. So if they're not giving you what you paying them for, go somewhere else. You don't need to pay them, you know. And I thought in the beginning when I was seeing like those awful people that I needed to like keep seeing them. You don't need to keep seeing them. You could literally go somewhere else. And a good therapist will understand, hey, yeah, we're not a good fit. I think that, you know, maybe they have somebody else they think is a better fit. So that's him. So even though when I first started my therapy journey, well, not first, but like college, I thought that I would never see another like Black mental health professional. I had a great Black therapist for a couple years, and I've had this great Black psychiatrist for several years. And it really was just something that I just kind of lucked out in that situation. They happened to be great the first time. All right, so I'm going to cut this video here because I got a lot more to talk about. So I'll put it in the next video. But since I'm cutting it here, everybody who's watching it this week, I want to tell you guys that I love you. Take care of yourself because you deserve it. I'll see you in part 2. Bye.